Not all deaths begin with a scream. Some begin in silence. No one hears it. No one sees it. No one stops. That night there was no traffic accident, no emergency call, no ambulance lights tearing through the dark. There was only a public trash bin, and inside it was the answer to a question no one wants to ask. When police opened the lid of the trash bin, they were not only confronted with the death of a child. They were faced with something far colder. The child had not died that night. He had been gone from the world for days. While people went to work, while parents took their children to school, while everyone believed that if something was wrong, surely someone would speak up. But no one did. That moment marked the point of no return. There was no way to fix it. No apology large enough. And the most terrifying part was not that a child had died. It was the question hanging in the air from the very beginning, backhand index, pointing right. If a child can disappear for days without anyone truly protecting him, who is responsible? Was it the person who caused the harm, the one who turned away, or everyone who saw the warning signs and chose silence instead? In his short 2 years of life, the child had no voice. And when he was gone, that silence remained. This story does not begin with the name of a perpetrator. It does not begin with a sentence handed down by a court. It does not begin with a broken family. It begins with a very small moment. A moment where, if someone had stopped just a little longer, if someone had asked one question a little sooner, the child might still be alive. But there was no if. And that is why you need to hear this story all the way through, not to witness a crime, but to understand what truly happened before it was too late. Before his name appeared in any report, before it appeared in the headlines, Frankie was simply a child. He did not know he was living inside a tragedy. Frankie did not understand words like responsibility, danger, or protective system. His world was very small, so small it revolved only around the simplest things. Frankie was a quiet child. Not the kind who runs toward strangers, but the kind who stands slightly behind, small fingers gripping an adult's sleeve, eyes watching the world with instinctive caution. Some children are born loud. Frankie was not. He existed in stillness. He was smaller than other children his age, underweight, fragile, but no one called it alarming. No one asked why a nearly 2-year-old looked so vulnerable. Frankie did not have big dreams. He did not dream of becoming a doctor or an astronaut. At that age, dreams do not need words. Frankie's dream was probably this simple: to be picked up when he was afraid, to be held when he cried, to have someone look into his eyes and recognize that he needed protection. Things that, for many children, are simply given. Frankie grew up in a world where safety was not always guaranteed. Some days passed in complete quiet, so quiet that no one noticed a child slowly retreating inward. He could not explain fear. He did not know how to name pain, and he certainly could not protect himself. Frankie had no voice, so he placed his life in the hands of adults. And that is what makes this story unbearable, because when a child like Frankie is no longer seen, no longer heard, no longer held at the right moment, the loss is not just a life. It is the loss of a person who never had the chance to grow, never had the chance to express what he needed, never had the chance to be treated gently by the world. And when Frankie disappeared, the world did not immediately realize it had lost something that could never be recovered.
Looking back at this story, there's one thing that's undeniably unsettling. That is, the signs appeared very early on.
Looking back at this story, one thing is impossible to ignore. The warning signs appeared early, not a single sign, but many small ones, quiet, scattered, overlooked. Frankie was lighter than other children his age, fragile, always appearing as if he were trying to make himself smaller in the world around him. But no one called it an alarm. No one stopped long enough to ask why. Old injuries appeared and faded, not always obvious, not always severe enough to demand confrontation, and so they passed. Frankie's family circumstances were no secret. Prior histories had been recorded. Promises had been made. Assurances that things were better now. The system saw it, but only at a glance. Files were created. Brief conversations took place. Assessments were made that everything was acceptable for now. No one imagined that the silence of a 2-year-old could hide so much. And this is where anger begins to rise. Not because something shocking happened, but because everything feels painfully familiar. The signs were not dramatic enough to shock, but numerous enough to form a terrifying picture when put together. A child too small to cry for help, an environment where adults believed it'll be fine, and a system designed to protect moving far too slowly. Frankie did not disappear in a single moment. He faded away gradually, through neglect, through half measures, through the belief that everything will be okay. And that is what makes this story so hard to accept. Because when all the signs are reviewed together, one thought becomes unavoidable. Backhand index pointing right. If someone had stopped just once sooner, if one question had been asked at the right time, this tragedy might not have happened. But no one stopped, and Frankie paid the price for that delay. It was not one warning sign. It was many small ones. Quiet, scattered, ignored. Frankie was lighter than children his age, fragile, always shrinking into himself. But no one called it alarming. No one paused long enough to ask why. Old injuries appeared and disappeared. Not always obvious, not always serious enough to demand action, and so they passed. Frankie's family situation was no secret. Prior records existed. Promises were made. Reassurances followed. The system saw it, but only in passing. Files were created. Brief exchanges occurred. Assessments concluded that things were temporarily acceptable. No one imagined that the silence of a 2-year-old could conceal so much, and that is when anger sets in, not because of surprise, but because of recognition. The signs were not dramatic enough to shock, but together they formed a chilling picture. A child too small to ask for help, an environment where adults assumed it's probably fine, and a system meant to protect moving far too slowly. Frankie did not vanish in an instant. He disappeared little by little, through indifference, through half-hearted decisions, through the belief that everything will be okay. And that is what makes this story unbearable. Because when all the signs are revisited, one question remains: backhand. If someone had stopped earlier, if the right question had been asked at the right time, would this tragedy have been prevented? But no one stopped, and Frankie paid the price for that delay. Tragedy does not always begin with a dramatic act. Sometimes it begins with a very small decision, so small that people believe it will not lead to serious consequences. In this story, the fatal mistake did not happen in a dramatic moment. It happened on an ordinary morning, a moment when an adult believed they could trust and walked away. Just a day at work. Just a few hours absent. Just one exception. A promise had been made: the child would not be left alone without supervision. A promise not to the law, but to the safety of a child who could not protect himself. That promise was broken. No one thought that just once could become the last time. No one believed that trust could place a child in such danger. And this is the moment viewers want to scream. Because every sign was already there. Every warning existed. All it would have taken was a different choice, one person saying no, one moment of not turning away. But that did not happen. The mistake was not loud. It did not draw attention. It did not force anyone to stop immediately. It passed quietly until its consequences could no longer be hidden. And when people finally looked back, when it was already too late, only one question remained: backhand. If adults fail to keep their promises, what does a child have to pay in return? That fatal mistake did not only end a fragile young life. It left behind a lingering sense of torment. A feeling that this tragedy was not the result of fate, but of a decision that could have been made differently. The search began in the most familiar way. Calls for help. Anxious faces. The same question asked again and again: when was the last time anyone saw the child? People spread out. Parks, pathways, hidden corners where a child might wander. But the more they searched, the less the picture made sense. Accounts began to shift over time. Small details started to slide out of alignment. One version here, a different version there. Not major contradictions, just tiny discrepancies, small enough for outsiders to overlook, but large enough to leave a feeling that something wasn't right. Public security cameras captured familiar timeframes. People passing by. The ordinary movement of an ordinary day. Only one thing was missing: the child. There was no footage showing him wandering off. No moment of panic. No sign of an accident. Everything was too quiet. And that silence became the clue. Viewers begin to realize something the people inside the story have not yet seen. If this were a real disappearance, there should have been evidence. A cry. An unusual movement. A moment of panic caught on camera. But there was nothing. The questions begin to change. No longer, where did the child go? But instead, what happened before? The sense that something is wrong grows stronger. Like a room that has been cleaned too thoroughly. No mess, no traces, no logic. And in this moment, the viewer is pulled into the role of investigator, beginning to connect the fragments, beginning to foresee a truth no one wants to face. The search is no longer about finding a child. It is slowly becoming a search for what was hidden. And when those silent details are placed side by side, they begin to say something very clearly. Backhand index pointing right. Some truths do not need confessions to be revealed. They expose themselves through what is missing. The search continues in familiar patterns. Calls for help, worried eyes. The repeated question, when was the child last seen? People fan out parks, paths, hidden spaces. But the deeper they search, the more the picture falls apart. Stories shift with time. Small details drift apart. Not blatant lies, just enough inconsistency to feel wrong. Public cameras show ordinary hours. Ordinary people. Ordinary movements. One thing is absent: the child. No footage of him wandering. No sign of panic. No recorded accident. Everything is too quiet, and that quiet becomes the clue. Viewers begin to understand what the people in the story have not yet grasped. If this were a genuine disappearance, there would have been signs. A scream. A sudden movement. A moment of chaos on camera. But there was nothing. The questions shift again. Not where did the child go, but what happened when no one was watching. The unease grows stronger, like a room scrubbed clean. No disorder. No evidence. No logic. And in this moment, the viewer fully steps into the investigator's role, piecing together fragments, anticipating a truth no one wants to confront. The search is no longer about finding a child. It is becoming a journey to uncover what was concealed. And when those silent details stand together, they speak with chilling clarity. Backhand index pointing right. Some truths do not require testimony to surface. They reveal themselves through absence. The moment the truth emerges does not arrive with screaming. There is no chaos. No dramatic shock like in the movies. It arrives quietly, after repeated questions, after mismatched details, after a silence that has grown impossible to ignore. The story of a missing child begins to collapse piece by piece. Not because someone witnessed something horrific, but because there was nothing. No trail, no journey, no moment showing a child leaving a safe place. And then, the truth emerges in the cruelest way: the child never disappeared the way everyone believed. He never went anywhere at all. That realization sends a chill through the listener, because it overturns the entire narrative. Every search effort, every fragile hope, all of it was built on an assumption that was wrong. The truth does not need shocking images. It only needs one understanding. While everyone was searching, the child no longer had any chance of being found. The feeling is not surprise. It is emptiness. A void where there should have been an opportunity, a phone call, a different decision. And it is this quiet moment that becomes the most terrifying of all, because it shows that sometimes the truth does not arrive like an explosion. It seeps in until one realizes there is nothing left to save. From that point on, every question changes direction. No longer where is the child, but what happened when no one was watching. And when viewers reach this realization, they understand they have crossed the most critical threshold of the story. There is no hope left, only consequences. Backhand index pointing right. This is the moment when the story cannot turn back. And it is also when the viewer knows they must follow it to the end to face what remains. After the truth is revealed, nothing ends. It begins in another form. Within the family, there are no complete answers, only emptiness. The emptiness left by a child who once existed, now remembered only in unfinished sentences. No one in the family can return to life as it was, not because of the law, but because of memory. Every what-if becomes a cut. Every recollection forces confrontation with the irreversible. Beyond the family, the community does not stand untouched. Those who searched, those who shared information, those who believed everything would turn out okay, they carry their own private guilt that they were there, but not early enough, not deeply enough, not enough to change the outcome. And then attention turns to the system, to questions with no easy answers. Who saw the warning signs? Who decided it was not dangerous enough? And how did a child so fragile slip quietly through every layer of protection? The system is not a person, but it is built from human decisions, and for that reason it carries responsibility. Yet there is another consequence, less often discussed: the effect on the person listening to this story. Because at this point, you are no longer an outsider. You begin to ask yourself, what if this happened closer to me? What if that child were a neighbor? Someone familiar? Someone I passed but did not stop to notice long enough? This story leaves behind discomfort, not because it is extreme, but because it is familiar. Because this tragedy was not created by a single moment. It was built through the accumulation of many acts of looking away. And that is why, in the end, no one truly leaves this story unchanged. This story does not end with a verdict. It does not close with a sense of full justice. Because no matter what the law decides, one truth remains unchanged: Frankie will never grow up. He will never have a first day of school. There will be no scraped knees soothed in safe arms. No chance to tell someone what frightened him. 28 months of existence. And then silence. The most haunting part is not the final moment. It is the days before it. The days when everything could still have been different. If someone had stopped sooner. If the right question had been asked. If a promise had been kept. But life does not operate on if. Frankie could not speak. And when he disappeared, that silence was passed on to everyone who remained. To the family. To the community. To the system. And to us. Because after hearing this story, you can no longer say you didn't know. You have seen how a tragedy is formed. Not from a single act, but from many moments of turning away. And perhaps the final question is not, who caused this? But rather, backhand index pointing right: the next time you notice a warning sign, will you choose silence, or will you stop just a little longer? Frankie does not get a second chance. But this world still does.